Moderating our panel today is a person that many of us know. He's been with us at the Symposium for several years, and he's been a longtime counselor to the ISO and others in the room, John Danner. John is a lecturer and senior fellow at UC Berkeley's Haas School of Management. He teaches courses on innovation, strategy, and venture development, both at Berkeley and at Princeton. John's faculty advisor to the Global Social Venture Competition and was the mind behind TED University. John recently published his latest book, now available on Amazon, The Other F Word, How Smart Leaders Put Failure to Work. Folks, join me in welcoming John Danner to the stage, and then join me in welcoming him to the audience as he walks around today. John Danner.
Thanks, Tom. I guess Jerry Springer wasn't available, so I'm going to be wandering around amongst you because I know with an audience this big, it's sometimes difficult when you're over on the side or in the back to feel like, are you in a live performance here or are you watching things on TV? So I'm going to try to wander around. But I think the real reason why Tom asked me to do this had nothing to do with my background. It had everything to do with my tie. Because it turns out that, it's hard to find a tie that's appropriate to the energy industry. But even more appropriate, I thought, was the setting of this symposium in Sacramento. Because, and I don't know what to read into this, we all came in from the downstairs, and what's going on downstairs? The Landscape Expo. And I thought, well, that's kind of appropriate in one way, because what we're going to be talking about over the course of this panel and a later panel today is the changing landscape of the energy industry, not just in the state, but regionally, nationally, and internationally. But even more appropriate, I thought, was the fact that the Sacramento arena has gone through 3 name changes. And I don't know quite what to read into that in terms of the backdrop for our panel, but I'll tell you what they started off as, the ARCO arena. Now that was yesterday. ARCO was a major player, as a fossil fuel player, et cetera. Do you know what it then became? The Power Balance Arena. And I thought that was particularly appropriate given the themes that we're going to be discussing. Unfortunately, however, today it is known as the Sleep Train Arena. So maybe this is a transition. We go from fossil to power balancing and all the complexity associated with that. And maybe eventually we solve it and we can all go back to sleep. So let me take my coat off because I'm going to be wandering around and I want these folks on the panel to be able to follow me. The duck chart that CalISO has made famous. Stephanie, if we could have that up here. First, let's introduce our panelists. Alex from Calpine, Chris from AES, Janaea from the California Energy Commission, our missing Gavin, he'll probably have the wisest things to say today. Stefan from Pacific Corp, Randy from from Northern California Power Authority, J. Brett Lane from SoCal Gas, and Steve Malnight from PG&E. Thanks to all of you for your time. So the setting of this topic is around overgeneration. How do we look at it? And as I was looking at that chart, most of you are intimately familiar with this chart. It occurred to me that if you tilt that to the left so that the duck is standing on its tail, actually the problem we're discussing is kind of like the middle-aged beer belly problem, right? It's a challenge that many of us in the audience can relate to. But the more fundamental question is how we should look at this overgeneration issue. Is it a problem? Is it an opportunity? Or potentially, is it a bonus? A bonus not unlike the Alaskan citizen dividend for oil reserves. And we're going to be talking about that in the context of our questioning today because we want to hear from our panelists about how we should be thinking about it, what should we do about it, why should we do about it, and when and who should we use to tackle this particular issue. Now, you might try to think about megawatts in different kinds of terms, but let's just give you a sense about what this might mean in terms of other policy objectives that you may be interested in and that the state and the region might be concerned about. 1,000 megawatts, in other terms, might look like this. We could talk about electric vehicles. We could talk about opening up a lot of laundries or doing a lot of laundry around the state. We could talk about washing dishes. We could talk about handling pool pumps. All of these are opportunities that we have and not even limited to this particular smorgasbord. So let me start back with a basic question to each of the panelists. Let's start in the back. Back left. How should we look at overgeneration? Problem? Opportunity? Bonus? Alex, let's start with you.
Oh, back left. Okay.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. This is always the
I'm
challenge
all
when
right.
you're translating stage directions.
Okay. Well, I don't know.
We can end the panel right there.
No.
None of us know.
I've got 2 points. I think it should be a tremendous opportunity. I mean, I think that, and it's good that we're sitting in bar stools back in the back row here because, I think we've got this interesting cocktail before us and hopefully we can mix it right. I mean, you have the Clean Power Plan, you have the leadership of the California governor and the state legislature and looking forward into greater renewable future. And you have the really good work that the ISO and Pacific Corps and others in the West have been undertaking to create greater transferability, within the Western grid. And when you think about overgeneration, I mean, this could be sort of, with the cocktail analogy, it could be kind of the zest or the twist, because, if this is a way to kind of bring together, with lower cost renewables that are, that we can't use, at certain times of the day and be able to transfer them to other areas, this really might help, our transition to, lower use of fossil fuels, particularly the coal resources. So I was looking, before I came, there's still 33,000 megawatts of installed coal capacity in the Western Interconnect. Over the last 5 years, we've retired about 10% of that. We look at the Eastern Interconnect, much bigger coal footprint, but they've retired 20% of it. And maybe, again, with this cocktail of the work you guys are doing at the ISO, the Clean Power Plan, the work of the regional utilities, and this extra zest of excess renewable energy that's cheap, we can kind of pull it together and get some of those units to retire.
Steve, how do you think about this issue of overgeneration? Problem? Opportunity?
Well, I think it depends. It depends. I think if we bring sort of just the solution set that we've always used in the past, it's a problem. But fortunately, we're here today. We're all talking about it. The chart is now famous, I think, around the world. And as a result of that, I think it's actually a great opportunity. But again, it's going to require some different thinking. It's going to require a different approach. And it's going to require us to sort of stretch the boundaries on the solutions that we've used in the past. I'm not sure I get all the way to bonus, because at some point we got to pay for the power. It's not like it's free. But what I do think is the really big opportunity that can come from that is if we do it right, it demonstrates the way to lead the way for others, so that maybe the rest of the country can chart its own path to follow along. So I'm sitting here today because it's an opportunity.
Janaea, what about you?
I think also it's definitely an opportunity for all of us. When I look at this, I look at it through the lens of the goals that Governor Brown has set out for us. A 40% reduction in greenhouse gas levels from 1990 levels. And that's a challenge. We've got to do a lot to be able to meet that, and bringing renewables online is one of the ways that we get there. I see it also as an opportunity because it helps us to enable cleaner transportation. We will be able to electrify our transportation fleet, and the cleaner that the grid is, the cleaner that transportation fleet will be as well. So I certainly see it as an opportunity and a way to help meet both the greenhouse gas goals that we have for the state and the clean energy goals, clean air goals as well.
Randy, your members are a different group than are represented on the rest of the panel. How do your members look at this issue of overgeneration?
Challenge.
Say more, please.
I think from our members' perspective, being most of them are on the smaller side, it's a big challenge because it's not predictable. So if we could look at the duck curve and say, this is the way it's always going to be, it's easier to manage. But for smaller utilities that just don't have the load diversity, they don't have the opportunities to do as much with it, it becomes more of a challenge. But there's a lot still to do in the opportunity side. We have to recognize our ratepayers are the ones that are paying for these renewables. They're buying them, and so they have to make that decision. You know, when it's an overgen situation, do we have that opportunity to bring it and the value right back to our customers directly, or is it going to have to be in a wholesale market, or is it going to be curtailed? So there are some significant challenges, and they might not have quite as many opportunities on how they can address it, but I think it'll be a combination. And if done properly, which means we know where it could go depending on the resources, that duck curve could look quite differently, and we know there's different choices that can be made in the resource supply. So the types of renewables that the folks end up contracting with going forward will make a big difference in how that duck curve looks going forward.
Okay, Stefan, you're not going to get off the hook. What's your sense of how we should be looking at this overgen issue?
First, John, just let me thank everyone for allowing me to be here today. I mean, it's really thrilling to be here a year after we went live with our energy imbalance market and already started delivering benefits to customers. But when I step back on this question, I think society and our customers are asking the question, is this industry going to make the changes needed to deliver safe, reliable, affordable power, and increasingly in a clean context? And I'm just thrilled to be a part of the folks that have led the way in this one first step towards that regional collaboration that is essential to delivering that result. And I just couldn't be more proud of the partnership that we've had with the Cal ISO and the team of folks at PacifiCorp to take this first step, and just thrilled again to see others taking that step with us and the additional benefits that that's going to bring not only to our customers but customers across the western U.S. So I think our answer back to that question from society is we are not the industry that you think of, that slow-moving utility industry that doesn't progress or take risks. We're an industry that's ready and able and will lead and execute on that challenge. And this is before the duck curve is frankly even entered into the picture. You know, so as Steve talked earlier, I mean, that is looking forward over the next several years. We've only begun to see the opportunity that is in front of us. And certainly for PacifiCorp, you know, with a very significant thermal fleet, the answer is fairly obvious. It's a great opportunity for both California and for our customers. When we can back down our fossil fuel, I can avoid spending money on fuel and not incur the emissions, and California finds a home for that power. It's a win-win for both sides, and we've only begun that venture. So thank you again to Steve and the ISO, and to those that are joining us. I think it's going to be a great ride and a huge opportunity for us to really deliver what our customers are looking for.
Brett, how does SoCal Gas look at this issue of overgeneration from your company's perspective?
Well, one, thank you again. It's kind of odd probably having a molecule person here with all the electrons flowing in the room. But I'm getting used to it because actually our team has worked with Steve and his team for the last 10 plus years as we've seen this evolution occur. Our view of it is it's both a challenge as well as an opportunity. You know, today as we're sitting here, the challenge to me is the slope, especially as the sun goes down and as that slope starts getting steeper, and how we address that. But we think there's some very interesting forms of technology, different things that we can do to help on that piece. But on the overgeneration side, we also think there's some very interesting forms of technology that we're actually working on right now that we've taken from our friends in Germany. And we're going to be piloting that here as far as to help a different way of looking at that overgeneration to how to address that.
We're going to get into those solutions in a second. Gavin, I think we're here wherever Gavin. Now arriving, stage right. So while Gavin's taking his seat, Chris, I don't think we've heard from you yet. And we may not.
Mic that was off, so it's no problem. Well, I want to echo the comments of it being a privilege to be here in AES. We're proud to be a part of the ecosystem here in California with the leadership of the governor and the regulatory bodies and legislature And I think what we see there with these groups working together is that they're rising to the challenge. So the duck chart is a specific form of challenge, but it's motivating a tremendous amount of innovation. We just mentioned one of the possible solutions. And we, obviously, at AES, we've been working with various solutions as well. We're very excited about what storage, distributed resources, and advanced flexible generation can bring to the table. And we can talk more about that. But I think what is happening is as we tackle the challenge, we're seeing new technologies come to bear, and that creates a derivative opportunity for us of a new architecture, because we have new resources with new capabilities in new places, in different business models. So how we put all that together is really the opportunity, I think, that is there for us, and we're seeing the state engage on that and the region engage on that with the cross-regional work as well.
Gavin, problem, opportunity, bonus? How does EDF look at this issue?
Opportunity, without a doubt. I think I should premise this by saying apologies for being late, and apologies for being the only person who's turned up not in a suit. I spent half an hour on the highway trying to convince a police officer that I was not driving a stolen motorcycle.
How'd that work out for you?
In the end, well, I had to put on my best British accent and my glasses.
We notice you don't have handcuffs on, so that's a good thing.
But no, I see it as an opportunity, mainly because we have done so well in producing or in procuring so much solar that we are one of the few states that has the opportunity to deal with an over and abundance of renewable electricity production. And there are a number of ways in which we can do this, which can spur on further changes to our clean energy revolution. So if we were to take the main source of generation as being in the middle of the day when solar is peaking and there is little use for it, that creates an opportunity for electric vehicles to move in to start charging during that time of the day. That creates an opportunity for time of use tariffs to try and shift demand away from peak periods and into the middle of the day or into the nighttime when wind is blowing. So without wanting to take up too much time, because I've taken up quite a lot in just not being here, I see it very much as an opportunity for furthering other technologies that can help deal with it.
So imagine for the moment that each of you were the czar of overgeneration. You had complete autocratic power to tell the state, tell the region what it ought to do about this issue. Because most of you looked at this as an opportunity, more opportunity than problem, maybe not quite bonus. But Chris, let's start with you. You're the czar. What's the solution to overgeneration?
I think a lot of the things the state is already doing are quite helpful and things that I support and that we support. One example of that is the all-source procurements. The best way, I think, to drive innovation into the system is to allow it to compete for the dollars that are being spent by the system. That's a huge advantage to the state's approach. And specifically in the case of storage, it's by allowing it to compete in an all-source, you bring it to bear, and you get some potential advantages over the alternatives, but you also get a complement to your other choices. So if you're still choosing and you have generation in the mix, as we have in California, you can complement that with storage, and it helps come together with the abundant solar energy to make a great combination. You wouldn't have had that, or you might have viewed it as storage as a bolt-on to the system if you hadn't allowed it to participate in an all-source program, for instance. So it's great news when we can put all the technologies together and see how they either are alternatives to choices we would have historically made, or complements, it's a way forward. It's a way we can pay for where we're trying to get to.
So you see storage as almost a keystone resource, linking both sides of the equation.
Yes, and storage is an alternative to certain types of generation that we might otherwise choose that are less efficient and less flexible and less capable. And it's also a complement to certain types of generation because it allows them to be more efficient. And it has the benefit of also playing as a load. So from a system architecture standpoint, it's both a supply side capability and a demand side capability in one package. And what California has done it has encouraged that those aspects be considered in their procurement proceedings, and they continue to push that forward as each new procurement is occurring.
So we've got storage as a potentially large-scale answer to either the opportunity side or the problem side. Brett, how do you see it from the point of view of gas, potentially?
Well, again, I think it's from the opportunity side as we look at it, as moving forward. For us, the big thing is just let technology go. Don't mandate certain paths. I do agree with Chris as far as from a storage aspect. It's a huge opportunity. We see it's one of let the technology go, let it develop, because ultimately what we have to do is deliver, a reasonable cost product to all of our customers out there as well. So for us, the big push right now is stay technology neutral, let it find its own path, and be creative as well. And look at different ways as far as how you can address and use the overgeneration.
Janaea, does the idea of, in effect, not placing bets on one particular technology or another make sense to you, given your background and focus on electric vehicles and electric transportation?
It sure does. I would suggest that we need to have a broad portfolio available to us. Your question about being the czar of energy world for a day, I think I would certainly echo the comments that you have heard on storage. If I could have the world be the way that I would like, we would replace as many conventional fueled cars with plug-in electric cars. Those could really help to soak up some of the overgeneration. In California, we've got about 155,000 on the road right now, and your chart that you showed a little bit earlier this morning noted that you need 475,000 just to do 1,000 megawatts. So we need a lot more of the plug-in electric vehicles on the road. Another thing that I might do is use some of that overgeneration to run electrolyzers to make hydrogen that could go into the hydrogen fuel cell electric cars. And as we know, Toyota just launched their Mirai yesterday. Hyundai's got hydrogen fuel cells, and that gives consumers a lot of choice when they're looking at what types of vehicles they might like to have. But these vehicles can also help us to soak up some of that overgeneration.
Alex, what are the implications of these kinds of solutions? You're now the czar. You've got a big fleet of gas plants. What's the implication here, and what's your answer?
Well, if I were czar, and I'd probably need more than one day, I mean, the first thing that I would say is, let's be very transparent with price and what sort of bang are we getting for our buck? How much is it costing us? And one way to do that would be really to have a lot of transparency around the cost of carbon. How much money are we getting for taking down that 1 ton of carbon? And with that, are there ways of, for our portfolio, for instance, could we optimize that portfolio a little bit better? Could we make it such that we would have shorter start times on our combined cycles and be able to cycle those units more effectively in order to, run less, burn more, burn less or create fewer tons of CO2? What are the opportunities, behind the meter? We're the largest cogenerator in the country. We have a large cogeneration facility in Pittsburgh. In addition to providing them steam, we also provide them 70 megawatts of electricity, both POSCO and Dow. If there's an overgeneration circumstance, why shouldn't we be getting the signal to turn off our generation units, run our aux boilers, and serve these guys from the grid? And why couldn't that be economic and actually be a great story for California that we're using excess, cheaper, perhaps already paid for, renewable energy to stimulate industry? So again, if I were czar, I would say let's try to be very clear and be very intellectually honest with the price of carbon, and let's look for ways of optimizing the system as it is, in addition to doing, the new technologies. But let's try to optimize the existing system.
Stefan, do your fellow czars, not that czars are used to sharing power necessarily, but have your fellow czars nailed this, or is there another solution that you would suggest if you had the superpower to come up with the right response to this overgeneration issue?
Well, I think in a word, diversity is what I would focus on, is how do we take advantage of that balanced portfolio that you'd want to optimize to ensure that you have that diversity to give the lowest cost, reliable supply we possibly can deliver to our customers. And frankly, that is exactly what we're pursuing. So I recognize I'm not czar. That's not a likely possibility at any point in time. But we have a tremendous opportunity nonetheless as we looked at this next step with Cal ISO to look at a fully integrated, fully optimized, 6-state system. Just beginning with us delivers $3 to $9 billion of benefits. That's just a drop in the bucket of what the opportunity could be if we went west-wide with a much broader set of diversity and optimized transmission, optimized placement of resources through the right market vehicles to make that happen. But I think that is, frankly, the opportunity that is right in front of us, and we don't need a czar. We can actually do this.
Randy, what have they missed?
Well, I think they've covered most of it, whether it was storage or electrification of the transportation. I think that's going to be a huge component that would be a focus if I were czar. But I think where we really need to look is the prioritization of our retail customers. How could they use it? Where can we develop? Where are those business opportunities with our retail customers for the utilization of as much as possible? If we store it, that means we're converting it, we're losing something. If we're sending it out of state, it means we have losses on transmission. How can we utilize it right in our retail service areas? How can we optimize that value to our retail customers? I think that's where we need to put a lot of emphasis at this point.
Steve, you've probably had as much experience as close to being a czar because you sit in a monopoly. What a great position. I tell students, right, you have choices of business models. At the top of the pyramid has to be a monopoly. But go ahead, what would you do if you were czar here?
Well, if you find a real monopoly, let me know, because I think there's a lot of players in this space. Look, if I were czar, I think after having a large stiff drink, I would probably move on to recognizing and reminding everyone, first of all, that the objective, and I think Janae was saying this earlier, the objective we're targeting here is carbon. We're looking for carbon reductions in the long term. So we do have to keep that squarely in our mind. I think the stuff that's already been mentioned is great. And I totally agree with storage and electrification. I really want to echo off of what Randy was saying. At the end of the day, what we're really seeing is a significant transformation in the energy sector. It was always based on the idea that customers were going to use energy kind of whenever they wanted, the idea that energy at one point in time of the year or day or minute was pretty much the same as energy at a different time. We're moving now to a place where we can send the right kinds of signals to customers and enable them to make different choices, most of which don't even have to have a huge impact. However, I want to remind everyone in this room, the average customer at PG&E looks absolutely nothing like any of you. All of us think about these kinds of things every day. Most customers don't want to think about energy. So we have to not only think of what's the sledgehammer we could use, we have to think about the scalpels. We have to think about the specific tools that recognize what customers want to do and send them the right kinds of incentives, not just decide to make everybody use energy in the middle of the day because that's when it's available. We won't be as successful at that.
So 30% of your ratepayers, if I recall correctly, are on low-income rates.
That's right.
How does that group of customers that you serve relate to this overgeneration issue and some of the techniques that you think might be appropriate to deal with it?
Well, so it is an important characteristic. Utilities they serve a vital societal purpose, not just to keep the lights on, but also to make sure all customers have access to electricity in their life. And there is a huge segment of the population in California, 30% here, that we provide economic assistance to. As a state, we say this is important and critical. We give them low-income rates and help them to make sure they can access this technology and energy. Those customers have specific and different needs. Obviously, volatility is a big deal. Your volatility, your bill is a really big deal if you're a customer who's deciding on buying food for your family or paying for your electric bill. That's something we have to never forget. It's something we need to keep an eye on. At the same time, those customers really want to save money. So we've used some of our critical peak pricing programs where we can engage customers who raise their hand and say, I'd like to see price signals and I will take advantage of them. They have great success on those kinds of programs when they stand up and say, I want to participate, because they have a high incentive to help save money. So if we send the right price signals to the right customers based on what they need, they'll take action, and we can get those benefits as an energy system.
Gavin, I didn't want to deprive you of the czar opportunity.
Thank you. I've only just realized...
I'm sure the first person on your list would be the cop that stopped you on your motorcycle today. We'll take care of him or her
He's
later.
going to get what's coming to him. I only just realized where you were. I just was seeing like this kind of omniscient set of questions just coming out of the ether. But nice to see you. If I do actually start most of my days staring in the mirror, saying, I'm the energy czar, before I end up spending the day playing solitaire in my office. I would say, I'm going to say two contrary things. One is that I feel that the California energy system needs a far greater embrace of markets. Now, when I say that, what we have today is in the world of storage, in the world of electric vehicles, in the world of demand response, you have utility procured markets. So that is, we are procuring 1.3 gigawatts of storage. They're going through cycles through the utility before they are eventually being procured and put on the system. What I would like to see is a broader market that allows these things to bid straight into the wholesale market, to aggregate together and to bid into the wholesale market. In the same way as you might see in the PJM market, not necessarily for storage, but for demand response, significant levels of deployment of demand response simply because they are allowed to bid in to a wholesale market that gives them, I think it's about a $12 billion market by this point, far exceeding our own. And this is one of the only areas where California is really lagging, is in demand response. We're exceeding in renewables, we're exceeding in electric vehicle infrastructure deployment, but when it comes to demand response, we're not doing very much at all. The second thing is, contrary to the idea of markets, I actually do think we need to be picking some winners. And I don't mean in terms of specific technologies, I mean in terms of specific technology groups. And that is, take energy storage, for example. If you have the 4 stages to commercialization of doing stuff in the lab, getting stuff out to deployment, then getting stuff out to demonstration, then getting stuff out to deployment, you have to bridge that valley of death, and that needs public support. And so I think the mandate that we have in place is exactly the kind of thing we need in order to be able to get this kind of stuff moving. So those are the 2 points that I really wanted to resonate. The third, which is just to reiterate what my main message is from being up here, is tariffs. We just heard from PG&E that we've had some considerable success on CPP tariffs. We've had a decision by the CPUC to default people to time of use tariffs by 2019. We have a period of time up until then to really trial and pilot different time of use schemes. My main thing as the energy czar is to see those pilots done incredibly well, to see the marketing, education, and outreach done so well that consumers really know what it is that they're signing on for as they move towards a time of use tariff. And I think that in and of itself can help with a great deal of the overgeneration issue, which was the start of this round of questioning.
So I assume that most of you on the panel would agree that we need better, faster, more accurate time of use rates. Are there other major changes in the tariff structure that any of you see as important? Standby tariffs, et cetera? Go ahead, Steve.
Well, I'll go. I think that one of the things we have to keep in mind is that we got to think about this in a layered approach. There's sort of what is the default that all customers will see, and recognize where customers are coming from. So we did an interesting study a little while ago when we talked to our residential customers and asked how many of you take action to time shift to save on your bill. How many of you do your laundry at night or whatever. Whatever you want to do, whatever you're doing. How many? 75% said they did. Now that's a great result of a lot of our advertising that goes way back to the energy crisis days with Flex Your Power and other things where we say, help the energy grid, use power at night. Don't use power in the middle of the day. But only about 3% of our customers are actually on time of use rates. So the point that I'm making is, the rate structure that most customers see is not necessarily the most determining effect. When you can talk to customers and engage them and say, I have a specific program that if you do this, you can save money on this, that causes them to make a choice. They choose to engage, and when they choose to engage, they'll take action based on those signals. If we just go out and say, everybody's already on it, we should have a relatively low expectation, because we are a pretty low engagement industry, of how long that's going to take for that behavior to shift. So I agree, we need to go talk to customers. We need to have a conversation with customers about what they want to do, how they want to engage, and then send the right signal so they'll take action.
Alex?
Well, I was encouraged coming out of 350 that there is this, I don't know if it's new, but this emphasis on integrated resource planning. And maybe not being a regulatory person myself, I'm hopeful that what this means is, again, optimization of the system. And that there are artifices, such as the standby tariff, which John mentioned, and which I referenced before in the case of behind-the-meter industrial load. I mean, tariffs that were put in place to protect the utility and the bundled customers if a co-generator, for instance, weren't available. And then the utility had to scramble in order to be able to serve that behind-the-meter load. Now the context is very different. We're talking about overgeneration. We're talking about, in this current time, an oversupply of capacity. And, what can we do in order to further optimize the system? In our instance, the one that I'm trying to sell today, is, we could pull down 200 megawatts off the grid. We could provide a 70 megawatt sink for excess renewable energy. That's meaningful. That's as meaningful as they get when I look at various demand response proposals. So, that's a specific instance, but I think overall, and what I'm hopeful and what I'm encouraged about is with an emphasis on integrated resource planning and looking, hopefully, as California always does, holistically, but also looking at optimization. How do we optimize our existing systems to kind of squeeze the most carbon out of them? And I think that would be a good goal.
So, were we talking about the Dow and U.S. Steel kind of scenario there?
Yes, precisely.
Can you, over here?
Where are you?
Right over here in the back, on your left. How does that work? You're Dow, you're U.S. Steel.
Okay, well, currently I have a facility, we have a facility, Los Medanos Energy Center. It's been operating. It was one of the first units to come on during the energy crisis and help break the back of that beast. And it has two steam hosts, Dow and POSCO. In addition to being steam hosts, they are also electric customers. They take 70 megawatts, and so while I'm generating electricity from my 560 megawatt plant, I'm also producing steam. That steam helps them with their industrial process. I'm also providing behind-the-meter electricity service. Right now, there's a standby tariff. If the standby tariff says that if I can't serve them, they're going to pay well in excess of the wholesale price of power. That's going to affect my decision of whether or not I shut down the generator and otherwise turn on the aux boilers in order to keep their steam load. So that's one example. It's a very significant example in terms of megawatts. I'm wondering if in other parts of our state and other behind-the-meter circumstances, whether or not by looking at tariffs and with a view to optimizing and taking advantage of the excess renewable energy, we can find, opportunities to, to reduce carbon by backing down fossil generation, including my own.
Chris, you were trying to get in earlier, I think.
Pardon? I couldn't hear the question.
It had to do with tariffs originally.
Yes, I think the tariff discussion should have, as was mentioned, I think multiple facets to it. One aspect is making sure that we provide a taxonomy, what I would call a taxonomy of need, or some type of way to make clear what the needs are on the distribution system and throughout the transmission system as well, so that different solution sets can come to bear. So it's not just engaging the customers, which I think makes a lot of sense, but it's also allowing other third-party players in industry to come and to try to meet those needs as well, either it could be through electric transportation, other types of services that they provide end customers, but can also serve the resource needs of the overall electric system. So
let's talk about challenges.
And I think in the case of storage, for instance, and in the example that was just mentioned about turn down capability, knowing where those needs are, and there's a general system need, but there can also be regional or very local needs for such things, and having that transparency available in a systematic way will mobilize industry to come to serve those.
Let's talk about some of the obstacles in the way of some of the solutions or responses that each of you have suggested. Some are large scale, some are more retail, some use one kind of technology, others rely on others. Brett, what's your sense of the biggest obstacle between us and the other side of this overgeneration issue that actually generates the kind of benefits that I think each of you saw, perhaps through different lenses?
Well, again, I do think that it's one of the obstacles is at times is we fixate on certain solutions rather than being broad-minded as far as how we can get there. And again, I think this kind of solution is going to it's going to involve multiple solutions. There is not a single one that's going to get us where we need to go in California. So I think being very open of different ways to get there. I think the second piece is that we have to be mindful of the cost as we go there. We talked a little bit earlier about just look at California again, and our base is similar to PG&E as far as about a third of our customers are on different forms of assistance. So it's being mindful to the impact of that customer class, in particular as we move forward. But I think another thing, again, which is an opportunity, is as we look at generational changes, the one thing that we're seeing is more of an appetite for some of the newer generations coming in of willingness to pay for different types of things that some of the other classes of customers may not want to do it. So I think there's an obstacle that we actually could turn into a different type of opportunity.
I hadn't thought about this idea of overgeneration in the demographic sense. I guess those of us in the baby boomer might be an overgeneration if you're a millennial. But Gavin, it seems to me that you're not quite with Brett in this regard, because Brett's talking about not putting bets down on particular technologies, and I think I heard you to say, no, mandates actually make some sense.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know Brett. He seems like a very nice man. I look forward to sharing a coffee with you afterwards. My point was that there are certain technology groups which I think need support. And I think we have done that historically with nearly every technology group in the clean energy space. So when it comes to solar, for example, we were there right through from the phase of R&D, through to the phase of demonstration, through to the phase of deployment, and ultimately commercialization. And as a result, we've had sweeping success on the solar front, on both rooftop and on the utility scale. My point is that I think we need to be doing the same thing for multiple different types of technology. So that goes to energy storage with the energy storage mandate, I think helping considerably to move that along. I think it goes to electric vehicles, where we have electric vehicle pilots being proposed by all of the three major utilities for building out the physical infrastructure that would reduce range anxiety and hopefully therefore build out more demand for electric vehicles. I think that is a necessary step and intervention into the marketplace to spur on a specific type of technology. So I suppose my point is, we often say we shouldn't be picking winners, and I would make a slight change to that, which is that we should be supporting potential winners.
So we support the race, but not the winner.
Right, support the race, but not the winner. I'm going to say that I said that.
Be my guest. Steve.
I do just want to say, and I agree a little bit with Gavin and Brett here, but I want to maybe frame this a little differently. I think one of the things that stands in our way is often ourselves, because, Gavin, as you're saying, there are times and places where incentives are needed when the market isn't going to support a technology that we need for the future, and I think that is the appropriate time and a place for us to make some small bets, really, to help push technology forward and get it there. One of the challenges, though, is that those things tend to never go away. So in the end, we end up with a situation where we have so sub-optimized our problem and lost sight of the goal of carbon, and instead we're looking at, how do we incent technology A and geography B with customer class C, and we spend a year on that in proceedings to talk about it. So I do feel like incentives have the right time for technology, but they need to go away so that we can, at the end, focus on the goal of carbon and let the system optimize itself.
So how do you do that? If trying to slice and dice it by regulatory proceedings is an inefficient, slow, overly complicated, very expensive process, is there another forum? Is there another mechanism that you think we should consider?
Well, without speaking about any ongoing proceeding at the CPUC,
thank you, Tom.
I do think we have to recognize that at some point we have to plan our portfolio and our energy system around carbon. We've got to understand what's the right portfolio for carbon reduction, as opposed to the portfolio that achieves 10 different goals and doesn't leave much left over for an optimization for carbon.
Janaea, what's your sense of this? Because you're primarily concerned, obviously, about electrification in the transportation sector, and apropos of the setup here, that the landscape is changing, right? The boundaries between the water industry, the electric industry, the transportation industry are themselves changing. What's the big obstacle to electric vehicle and electric transportation?
I think one of the biggest obstacles or the biggest challenges in this space, again, going back to the climate goals that we need to meet and the carbon reductions that we need to see, 40% below 1990 levels by 2030 and 80% by 2050, that's a big transformation. And so I think one of the challenges that we have here is just the magnitude of the transformation that we need to make, and then the timeline in which we need to do it. We need to do this fast, and we need to go a lot faster than we're going right now. We've got 155,000 electric vehicles on the road. We've got quite a bit of infrastructure to support those. The governor's put out a goal of having 1.5 million electric vehicles and the infrastructure to support them by 2025. We're going to need to continue going on from there. And I think one of the things that's interesting in this space is probably all of you have heard of, plug-in electric vehicles. You know that there's fuel cell electric vehicles out there, but at most instances, the general public does not know that they're there. They don't see the charging infrastructure that goes along with it. And so some of it is just outreach and education, letting people know that there are choices there available for them that have no tailpipe pollution. And the no tailpipe pollution is what gets us to the climate goals and also to the clean air goals. But a challenge is going to be making sure that everyone knows that those options are available for them, if not in the passenger car fleet, in other places, in the transit system. Lots of electric mobility for folks who don't have cars, making sure that they have options and accessibility in this space as well. But again, it's just going to be that transformation and making sure that people know that the cars and the choices are there, and then how do we accelerate that into the marketplace as quickly as we can to meet the climate and clean air goals.
You got any ideas about how you accelerate?
Well, we've got some great incentive programs out there. The Energy Commission runs a program that puts up to $100 million investing in transforming transportation, and we're trying to help accelerate the infrastructure. We are trying to help, most of the time what we're looking to fund are projects that can be modelable or scalable. So here in Sacramento, a great example of that is you may have seen the all-electric UPS truck. To the extent that all-electric trucks work for a UPS route, it's a huge company. They could be able to transition all of the vehicles that go on routes that can meet that the duty cycle of those vehicles. And so we're looking for projects that have the ability to be transformative, kickstart those, and then hope that the industry picks them up and runs with them.
Randy.
So I think one of the big challenges, and we've seen it kind of across the board for utilities, is technology in itself and changing to technology and not having standardized platforms in which we're utilizing. We saw that when I was involved first in plugging in ships down in the city of Los Angeles. Certain plugs that we went down there weren't the same utilized around the world and in other locations. So we're trying to get those standards. We're seeing it in the electrification of transportation and vehicles and the plugins. How do we do the right plugging infrastructure? So what's the common platform? And for many utilities, it's huge capital dollars of investment, whether it's your billing system, your metering system, and all these tools that we need to do some of the things we're talking about is that technology risk, is how do you know that's the right technology to go with and take that type of chance. So some of the standardization for common platforms, and as people talk plug and play, how is that backbone going to be common so you could plug and play with pretty much any tool you want, because we know what the basic standards are. And I think we still have a lot of work to do in that area, but it is a very big challenge for the utilities as they look at how they're going to invest those capital dollars in the future in order to bring this paradigm forward.
Stefan, you've got a lot of experience on the front lines of this regional integration that David and Steve talked about earlier. What have you learned from that experience so far that bears on this over generation, both opportunity and potentially complicating issue?
I mean, it's been very exciting, and I think as I listen to all the other comments that have been made, I mean, at the center of all those transactions is the grid. I mean, that is our most valuable asset. It's the asset that's required to make all these transactions take place as we move forward from a one-way flow world to two-way transactions across the grid and leveraging much more diverse resources than we've ever had on the grid, with less predictability and volatility that can only be mitigated effectively if we're leveraging diversity. And I think in our system at PacifiCorp, we started as a 6-state system with a fair bit of diversity across our system without being a part of a larger balancing authority. So we saw the benefits of that, and we're able to integrate 2,000 megawatts of wind, being the largest utility owner of wind in the West with that first step. And we've got another 1,000 megawatts of solar coming on in the next couple of years, and reducing that cost as we're integrating large volumes of renewables into our system. While we could do it on our own, along with all the other 38 balkanized balancing authorities across the West, we recognize the opportunity to do that at a much lower cost by partnering with the Cal ISO and leveraging diversity across a much bigger footprint. Again, it's not hard to intuitively see, the sun shines at a different time of day in Utah than it does in California. Our loads peak at different times of day. The wind's blowing in Wyoming or the Columbia Gorge at a different time than it may be in Tehachapi Canyon. And leveraging that diversity is what we've already realized, 21 million benefits in the first 8 months of operation. I think the last quarter we're estimating is another 10 million or more of benefits just in the first few months of operation. And this is with a lot less renewable on the broader grid than, again, what we're all forecasting and shooting for as we transition. We're committed to transitioning our portfolio off of what has been a low-cost fossil-based system over the next 15 years in a very dramatic fashion. And again, the key for us is setting this foundation where, frankly, we'd like to be as the utility grid provider, indifferent to the technologies that come on, indifferent in such a fashion that our customers that are paying for use of that grid, whether they're buying power or selling power, if you will, through their own devices, that there's a fair share of the costs of managing that grid across the system. And I think that's a key near-term challenge as we've talked about tariffs and rate design. And I think it is about speed. We could do this over a long-term time frame, but I think our customers and society is demanding that we move a lot faster. We've got to get more innovative and more creative in how we approach that, and we can't just wait for a crisis to occur. And so I've been very encouraged, again, just with the stakeholder process that I'm sure a lot of the folks in this room participated in. I mean, it's complicated. There's a lot of things to work through, but we've shown that we can do this, and we're setting that foundation. So that's what gives me a lot of hope that we're on the right path and we can really deliver this product for customers.
So each of you, like most people in the audience, are constantly juggling an entire portfolio of different issues, some big, some small, some urgent, some not so urgent. In the grand scheme of what you guys are spending time dealing with, thinking about, worrying about, how important is this overgeneration issue? Go ahead, Gavin.
Huge. Huge and potentially going to get huger. Mainly because we're now moving to 50% renewables, and if that is met by large amounts of solar generation, then you see an excess of overgeneration during the middle of the day. So the majority of our work, aside from the time of use work that we're doing through the pilot programs before it becomes a default tariff in 2019, is on the regional expansion of CAISO. And therein lies considerable benefit. I think CAISO just produced a report last Tuesday suggesting that by expanding into Pacific Oil regions, you would be able to save up to $600 million in just not having to build and over-procure renewable energy in order to meet the state goal. And that is a huge saving for California customers. Now, it's odd for an environmentalist to be saying, let's not build quite so much renewables, but building so much renewables that you don't use is a hiding to nothing. So the short answer to your question is time of use first, and then regional expansion of the CAISO market second.
How about the rest of you? Is this on the top 5 of the issues that you worry about and care about? Chris?
Yes, right now, we've talked a little bit about storage, but we have a fleet of storage in the company that is providing flexibility in the markets we serve. We've had a fleet operating now for over 8 years of battery-based storage. That's about 80 megawatts now in operation. We're currently building 9 more projects across 5 additional states and 5 more countries than we're in now. That's another 100 megawatts of under construction. And in every market, we're seeing either flexibility for renewables, issues related to the interplay between traditional generation and its service and reliability, and the mandates in those markets for renewables. And so when we bring storage to those markets, and we're, as I said before, we're very proud to be working in California, who's really leading this charge in many ways, we see in all of these other markets the same general issues. They're not all exactly the same, so you don't see the duck curve in every market, but you may see a situation where you have overgeneration of wind in a market, but you need generation online for reliability. Now, in those systems, you still need the generation to create energy. So it's separating out how you look at the provision of energy in an efficient way from that generation and meeting all of the climate and reliability objectives that those markets have. So it's definitely something that we're seeing in our markets.
Brett,
and we're bringing storage to play in those
Does
markets.
this issue loom to the top, rise to the top, loom to the bottom, whichever metaphor you want to use? How important is this in your agenda?
Well, it's actually something we do think about almost every day. I mean, it's both short-term on the horizon, as far as what we're dealing with today with 33%, because our kind of running joke, it's great to have a power plant sitting there somewhere when the sun goes down, but if there's no gas underneath it, it's not going to do anything for you. So we spend a lot of time in coordination with the ISO today And as we move forward and see that number grow, we see that dependency, and as we call it, the interdependency between the gas and electric system becomes even greater. On the long term, and this is to me, I'd like to push the discussion a little bit around, and we've had some discussion around the need to decarbonize or reduce the carbon. I think we need to think of carbon in a much broader sense, that we can think and talk about it from the transportation sector, which we need to. And our company really supports the advancement of the electric vehicle, especially in the residential side. But back to my point, as far as being open to technology, there's different forms that are out there that we can use today, such as in heavier trucks or even in the medium trucks that was mentioned earlier, where natural gas today can serve a role, and its emissions coming out of that is actually less than the cleanest and most efficient power plant today. So if you bring in a zero tailpipe emission electric vehicle back to its generation source, it's similar. But as we look at this long range, again, we see it's a huge opportunity in two different ways. Again, on carbon, one of the biggest issues we have in California, again, as you look at carbon, is actually methane emissions. And the vast majority of methane emissions comes from the ag and waste industry. We see opportunities there to capture that and actually use that as a fuel source into our system, which decarbonizes, it reduces the use of fossil fuel, and in the longer term is something that we call power to gas, and that's actually taking some of the excess power and actually, I think the electrolyzer was mentioned earlier, creating hydrogen, which has its own uses, or if you want to take it the next step and combine it with some form of CO2 capture, then you can combine those two, and we've just created methane. And so again, as we look at this in the long term, it's a fascinating technology that's out there. It's but one of many, but again, we see this as something in a longer range of different ways to help address the issue, but continue to decarbonize the state of California.
Steve, how important is this issue on your agenda?
Well, I sort of smirked when you said, is it in the top 5? Because with the exception of, safety for us, safety of our system is probably the number 1 priority for just about everything all of us do. But number 2 through 5 probably all have overgeneration in them. So it is, when I think about our priorities around achieving California's aggressive climate goals and really making sure that we have the right energy market structure and utility business model to succeed in that future, overgeneration sits right, at the crux of those 2 issues. So I would say this is something we talk about every day. And it is an issue that is going to require a lot of different solutions to achieve both of those. And as I said earlier, we're going to have to put all those things on the table and look at them holistically to come up with the right kinds of solutions. So this is an everyday kind of issue.
Randy, your members face particular problems. You talked to me on the phone about just the practical challenges. You're running a small public utility in Northern California. You've got a limited budget. Suddenly you have all the complexity of dealing with compliance issues to be able to take advantage of this changing landscape we've been talking about, and you don't have a lot of diversity among your own resources to be able to do much with overgeneration. Is this a vital issue for your members?
So yeah, I think it's a critical issue for our members on how they're going to address it going forward. But one of the things that I want to highlight, because we've heard a couple times, if carbon is the agenda, one thing I just want to point out, the forest fires that we had this year in California probably put out more carbon than any of us in this room will put out for several years. So if we're serious about carbon, we need to be serious about what we do with forest fires here in the state. And that means utilities have an opportunity here as well. We have an opportunity with biomass that could also help us with our renewables. It can assist with a program like this, and many of our smaller utilities actually reside in areas that they're in the middle of those places where fires can cause the most damage to their communities. And so this could be a key help as we look at abilities to do small biomass and those types of opportunities. The other thing that we're challenged in the state, obviously in our 4th year of drought, is just the lack of water storage and and the lack of hydro resources that could help balance some of those renewables. But the utilities can partner better with a number of our water entities and agencies, and I still think we have a big gap there that the utilities, and especially the smaller utilities, can work more as we look at how we're going to build more storage. Let's ensure that we take that opportunity to add the small hydro generation that could go as an opportunity with that storage. So yes, we have some really unique problems as smaller entities, more in these remote communities, but there's opportunities that are a little different. I mean, one of our members is Truckee Donner. Their peak is weekends in the winter season from all the skiers. All right, we can solve some of our problems because they have a need for the energy during those periods of time.
If I remember correctly, in the early stages of electrification of the United States, to solve this load balancing issue, that was one of the reasons why electric trolleys ended up in electric amusement parks, so that you could generate load during the evening and over the weekends. Gavin, you were trying to get in, I think, in comment in reaction to something Brett said.
No, I wanted to inject a little bit of controversy into proceedings.
These things are not controversial. This is everybody's agreeing here, right?
We've all been incredibly cordial so far, and I feel that it's about time we started throwing chairs and
all right,
food
go
at each
ahead.
other.
Chainsaws are welcome too.
So there has been a long dialogue around carbon being the ultimate goal, and I would agree wholeheartedly that that is ultimately what we're trying to reduce. But we are not the only state, let alone the only country, that has in place a carbon regime that is supported by a number of other initiatives to spur forward renewables, to spur forward energy storage, to spur forward demand response, to spur forward energy efficiency. And there is a very simple reason, it's not a very simple reason, but there is a reason for that. And that is that carbon regimes by themselves, first of all, as we've seen, produce reasonably low prices. Now that can be fixed by increasing the or by reducing allocations. But more importantly, the type of technologies that you're looking to build are highly capital intensive and upfront capital at that. Now when you're trying to repay that through volatile carbon revenues that come from a cap and trade type scheme or from any other carbon type scheme, the financing of those types of technologies becomes far harder to get and to sustain. And so many countries, all EU 27 countries, have put in place renewable energy targets as a means of bolstering the amount of money that goes to renewable energy, knowing full well that the carbon market itself will not build these things. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there in response to Steve, although I think his point is well made, that carbon alone doesn't get you where you need to get. Well, you need other things on top of it.
Yeah, Alex?
Yeah, I suppose it sort of depends on, how you're getting your carbon revenue and what is, of course, the carbon price. And one of the things, that expressed earlier is there needs to be a greater level of transparency what we're paying for carbon reduction. I mean, doing kind of crappy lawyer math, if I look at a net energy metering regime and I'm looking at the avoided retail tariff versus the wholesale price of electricity, I'm coming up with $400, a ton. That's a lot when AB 32 carbon markets are trading at 12. So, we have different stovepipes or different silos that are pricing carbon, some of which are transparent, some of which are not. And I think that, to say that, that the markets, particularly the financial markets, can evolve to provide financing for different types of technologies that are truly efficacious in reducing carbon. I mean, I think that that's not true. And empirically, I mean, if you look again, I referenced it in my first comment, the Western Interconnect has been successful at reducing coal generation, 10% in the last 5 years. The Eastern Interconnect, it's reduced it by 20%, over 40,000 megawatts, largely because a more efficient, cheaper, more flexible technology that produces carbon at a lower level is out there displacing it, and that there's a lot of dynamics associated with that. So, what I would say for California, this goes with, the optimization and maybe, something that Steve Malnight had said about, kind of running in, you didn't say this exactly, but, having these kind of public policy or regulatory cul-de-sacs where, we were trying to incentivize, a certain type of technological development, and we seem to get stuck there. Is one of the things that I think that we really should do in an effort to optimize is to try to be transparent and to try to be intellectually honest for what we're paying for.
Chris?
Yeah, I agree. The title here, one of the words that was used was plentiful energy. I think natural gas is our other plentiful energy. We have solar in mind, I think, when we hear that, or wind and solar, which are plentiful as well. But I think gas is the other plentiful resource, and it has been shown, I mean, the facts are there, as were just mentioned, on the ability of gas to reduce net carbon, and it can continue to do that. And as I said before, I think, we talk about things like storage coming in. As I said, it can be an alternative to inefficient gas plants, but it can be a complement to make the most efficient ones even more efficient. So it's that combination, it's that overall perspective on a focus on that net reduction that I think can allow us to use the plentiful gas to help meet the objectives as well.
So what are we missing in this discussion? Have we pretty much covered the field here in terms of major responses, major issues, or have we missed something?
Where are you?
You need to get your eyes checked. Maybe that's why that cop stopped you. Driving the wrong way.
What are we missing? That's a really good question. So, if the blanket coverage was over generation, we've covered regional diversification, we've covered energy storage, we've covered time of use tariffs, we've covered demand response, we've covered a multitude of ways of dealing with overgeneration. What we haven't dealt with as much is, with moving to 50% renewables, are there ways in which that we can tweak that system so that it doesn't exacerbate the issue of overgeneration? I don't know if there is a solution to that or not. Utilities will build what are the cheapest things to build, which at the moment is utility scale solar. But should there be a means by which other forms of generation can start to fill that gap, other forms of generation, specifically on the renewable side, can start to fill that gap, such as wind? I think that's one area to look at. But more specifically, I think, to kind of really hit home the point I was making on demand response, it is the least, in my mind, it is the area of technology that we have paid the least attention to. And as we move towards an increasingly steep overgeneration curve in the middle of the day, we need to find a way to shift that demand into the middle of the day, or else we're going to be dealing with very considerable levels of overgeneration that we're just not using.
Steve?
The one thing I would throw out that we haven't talked a lot about is, I believe, technology on the grid itself. I was recently visiting with some other utilities, and we were having this conversation, and I was sort of struggling to understand their perspective until I realized they didn't even have smart meters. And I can't even contemplate a world anymore without smart meters in terms of how that impacts how the grid runs and how we can run the utility and the grid in better ways. But I think that's just the start of what technology can offer. And as we start to see a grid going forward where we need to be more dynamic, we need to be more responsive, we need to make different localized decisions based on local conditions, and we need that to happen basically instantaneously. I do think it requires us to systematically look at the grid we've built over the last 100+ years and look for places to inject technology to, to really enable that grid to support it. Because I think it was said earlier, all these technologies that we're talking about, they all rely on the grid. Without them, they're just, without the grid, it's just an interesting idea. So we got to get the grid ready to put them all on.
Janaea.
I think also in answer to your previous question about whether this is on the top 5 for the Energy Commission, absolutely. I mean, this is something I think that my colleagues and I think about every day, not just the overgeneration, but as we go to the 50%, how do you get increased renewables potentially without as many of the maybe pitfalls that we've seen so far, so that we're integrating those renewables in a really smart way with some of the solutions and opportunities that we thought about here today. The only thing I would add that I don't think we missed it, but it would be a very interesting topic to have further discussion on is this is the overgeneration really challenges us to think about the grid, I think, in new ways. I think we need to think more broadly about our energy system. So not just electricity generation, not just the transportation energy demand, not just the natural gas system, but how all of those systems are beginning to converge and how they fit together. And as we're working towards decarbonization, they probably fit together in interesting and innovative ways. Some technology we have now, some technology is probably still yet to be invented, but as those systems converge, I think it'll be really interesting dialogue to see where we go and how we get to the carbon goals.
Randy?
Well, I would agree with several of the comments, and as I had mentioned before, technology, I think, is one of the riskier elements, and it's going to require a substantial amount of capital investment. Many of my small members, they don't have AMIs at this point. They don't have CIS systems that are capable of doing creative billing types of services. They don't have meter data management systems in order to manage the data under which you could put the signals out and try to get customers to do things differently. So there's a lot that needs to still be done in order to take advantage of some of the benefits. The other thing, in my previous role prior to coming to Northern California Power Agency, I would go sit with some of my controllers in the control room, and as they were trying to look at all of these behind the meter large systems that were being installed for solar PV type systems, they wanted a criteria that they could monitor them down to systems that were 100 kilowatts. And we said, no, we can't afford to do that. That's too expensive. So we went up to 1 megawatt. But we were having so many 1 megawatt or greater behind the meter systems installed, they started indicating this is a challenge because it's like, 1,000 aircraft landing on the same runway at the same time when there's an issue on how they're going to address it, how they're going to switch it out. And I know the Cal ISO deals with this every day, but that's part of the challenge, as well as the management and control systems that are going to be necessary to operate the grid in the future. I think the reliability risks are very, very high. We all know our cyber risk that are out there as we do more interconnecting of all these various systems, but the types of control systems that are going to be necessary to manage all this diversification is going to be a very big challenge going forward.
Let me give each of you an opportunity in closing to send a message to the second panel, and mindful of Tom's admonition about active proceedings and the like. You're the first panel, right? You've been thinking about overgeneration. We're going to have a second panel this afternoon thinking about regional integration. If you had one message to that assembled group of regulators, I'm not even sure what you call an assembled group of regulators. It's probably not a gaggle. Probably not a group. There must be some phrase here for an aggregation of regulators. What's the one message you'd like to give that group? Go ahead, Brett.
Well, actually, the first one, and I also want to answer your last question as well, because I think this is something that needs to be thought of, and that is, we talk a lot about the overgeneration side of the curve, but it's when that generation stops during that period of day, we need to be very thoughtful in how we move and transition, be it 5 years, 10 years, 15, whatever it is, in different forms of storage to deal with that. Because otherwise, we're going to lose some sight and focus on the resiliency piece. So I think it's one that we also need to be paying equal attention to as we look at the overgeneration side And I think that goes directly to the panel. The second piece to me is also, and one we didn't talk a lot about, it is different forms of distributed energy, which could be a major disruptor that's beyond solar today, be it different types of advancements with fuel cells, different types of combined heat and power type systems that help address another part of the governor's issue on the 50% on the energy efficiency side of cleaning different systems up. Those could become huge disruptors that change the way that we look at actually all the people up here managing the grid.
Steve, what's the message to the second panel? By the way, somebody told me as I was walking back here, the right phrase might be the gang of regulators, but maybe that's a competition we could enter into during the day. But go ahead.
Well, I think I'd probably send the message I sent earlier today, which is, we've got big opportunities ahead of us, and we've got to enable some different solutions to come to truly realize them as opportunities. So let's get really clear about our objectives. The electric system has always operated on a premise that our objective is safe, reliable, affordable energy. That's always there. Clean energy is a critical part of our objective. So let's get clear on our objective. Let's understand all the different levers we have that are available, and let's enable the optimum portfolio to emerge without just picking the individual winners. Doing that sensitive to Gavin's point, which I do agree with, that if there are technologies we're going to need in the future that can't come forward, then let's look for specific opportunities to help those technologies move. But otherwise, let's let the portfolio emerge to achieve our objectives.
Gavin, I'm over in the corner. What's your message to second panel?
Is it me?
Gavin.
Oh, okay. Well, I think it might be a murder, like a murder of crows or murder.
Oh, I get it.
I'm sorry.
Is that more wish than description, or what? I'm not quite sure.
It's nothing. I wouldn't characterize it. I was just trying to answer the question. So I would say, as I opened up before, pour them a cocktail. I think that there's really a great opportunity, with the work that the ISO has laid out and working with Pacific Core and others to increase the transferability in the West and to try, and with markets that should allow, hopefully, for the better dispatch of resources and thinking about the Clean Power Plan and maybe it's maybe that would allow for a more sort of carbon sensitive dispatch of resources. And then the second thing that I would say, for the California regulators, I won't direct it to the California regulators. I would say that, there's probably anywhere, let's look for opportunities to optimize. And I think that the first place you need to go is, if carbon's what we're solving for, let's get a price on carbon, let's make that price transparent, and let's be intellectually honest about it. So then we can make decisions about maybe it's better to repave roads than do something else as a way of reducing carbon.
Gavin, what's your message to the second panel?
I got three. One, I would assume that they've got connections so that they could get my motorcycle taken off the stolen motorcycle database so that I don't have this recurrent set of interactions with the police. The second would be time of use tariffs. Don't let them fall by the wayside between now and 2019. Keep the momentum going throughout the pilots. And then the fourth would be to get wholeheartedly behind regional expansion. There are considerable benefits to be gained from just expanding into Pacific markets, but there are others who are interested in addition. And it will have a considerable impact on the cost of meeting our renewables portfolio standard and considerable savings for the California consumer.
Chris, your memo to the second panel?
Sure. I would say first, keep the game fair and keep the bar high. So I think the bar has been set pretty high, and industry has been rallying to meet what the targets have been, and I think we want to continue that. And I think keeping the game fair is what I would say is what I had said previously. is making sure that we look at all sources together at the same time in some type of consistent fashion, giving that transparency so that we get the right things to show up. And I think if we do that, we can end up with what I would call an unbreakable clean grid, and we can see something that's more like the internet. The internet, your access to the internet may go down, but the internet itself doesn't go down. And it's because of the design, and it's because of the enabling technologies. And what's exciting about all of the change that we're seeing is just that all of the new technologies and their capabilities. And we haven't really thought about what that means about how we design the system in the future. And I think that's the area where our government can help point the direction. That's what they did for the internet. I think we can do it for the electric grid of the future.
Now, Janaea, you're one of these. So what's your message to your colleagues on the second panel?
My message to my colleagues in this space is, I would just look to a lot of the successes that California has had as we are working to meet with the 33% renewable portfolio standard on our way to 50%. I mean, there are great lessons learned, there are great successes, there are business cases, there are innovations in technology. There's all kinds of things that I think folks will be able to carry forward. I know California, of course, has some of the strongest clean air standards to meet and some of the strongest climate goals that we are working to meet, and a lot of the other states don't have that. But many of the things that we are working on here in terms of modernizing the grid are things I think that carry and translate very well across the West, across the country. And so I'd kind of focus on and highlight on those common ground things that are translatable and make sense in any grid.
Stefan, final word.
So let's roll up our sleeves and get this done. I mean, we have a tremendous opportunity to do this right and thoughtfully. I think our industry, we're kind of known for studying things to death and really making it all complicated. I'm one of those. I'm an engineer and like to make it really sound difficult, but you know, the fundamentals of making this happen, as you look at the abundant resources we have across the West, there's no place like it in the world. We have the best solar resources in the world, the best wind resources in the world. We have an extraordinary hydroelectric system, and it's all interconnected today, you know, by a physical grid. There's got to be investment in that grid. There's got to be changes on regulatory rate design, but we can do this. Our little utility in Iowa is already at 57% renewable. They don't have the amount of demand response that I have to work with today. They don't have storage and the other tools that we've got to work with across the western U.S. So we can hit 50%, we can do this, but we've got to work together and just roll up our sleeves and get it done.
Please join me in thanking Brett, Steve, Randy, Stefan, Janaea, Gavin, Chris, and Alex.